This book is gay by Juno Dawson. As soon as you read the title of this book, you'll already know why it's banned in some places. It basically gives life to the saying, don't judge the book by its cover. And when your book title has the word gay on it, you're asking for trouble. This book is gay is a guide for young people figuring out gender and sexuality. It covers everything from coming out to dating to LGBTQ+ history. It is clear, informative, and unfortunately for conservatives, honest. It's the type of book that carries a rainbow flag and wears a rainbow shirt everywhere it goes. Gender has always been a topic that's hard to talk about because everyone has their own ideas. But This Book is Gay doesn't hold back and talks about sex education in a way that includes LGBTQ+ people. Instead of using vague words or pretending that only straight people exist, it gives real information that conservatives, who think gender is a black and white topic, find uncomfortable. But the problem is not the subject. Instead, it's that the book refuses to act like LGBTQ+ relationships are some secret society that must never be spoken about. Another reason the book gets banned is that it challenges the idea that gender and sexuality fit into neat little boxes. It points out that people do not all fit into the labels society has handed out, like prepackaged sandwiches. This idea doesn't fit the belief of a lot of people, mostly because they have spent their whole lives following a rulebook that forgot to include half the human population. Of course, adults and religious leaders don't like it when books tell kids how to be gay, and the book refuses to act like being LGBTQ+ is a tragic struggle, making the topic feel light and casual. And when you're still in the 1950s, when being gay was a mental disorder, you're not going to like books like these hitting the shelves of local bookstores. The Color Purple by Alice Walker. It's the early 1980s, and society was quickly shedding its conservative clothes, allowing people to talk more about topics that used to be taboo. But that doesn't mean some people could simply talk about sex, gay love, and abuse without wondering if they've gotten too far. And that's one of the reasons why The Color Purple is still a hotly contested book. The novel follows the story of a poor black woman named Celie. Her life didn't start easy because fate didn't just hand her lemons, but basically threw them at her face. She was abused by her father and forced into a terrible marriage with a man named Mr. At home, she was treated like furniture with cooking skills because her husband didn't love her. And because no one listened to her, she wrote letters to God, hoping he would check his mail more often than the people around her. But while in the middle of all the beatings that made Celie's skin look like the color purple, she meets another woman named Shug Avery. They form a relationship that allows Celie to learn she's not just a walking punching bag. Eventually, she starts to see she also deserves happiness, and every plot twist life has to offer. Meanwhile, Celie learns from her sister's hidden letters that her father isn't actually her father. That revelation helps her take charge of her life, launch her own business, find real happiness, and even make peace with her husband. Not bad for a woman who started out getting treated like yesterday's laundry. It sounds like your usual feel-good story, but don't be fooled. This book dives into a taboo swimming pool full of abuse, racism, and women-loving women. Well, even though it was published in the 80s instead of the early 1900s, it still wasn't okay to make certain topics feel normal. In The Color Purple's case, it didn't hold back on sexual abuse, same-sex encounters, and brutal black men. It's not the kind of book you'd want your kids reading in their libraries, especially if they think it's about their favorite color. The Lorax by Dr. Seuss. If there's anything rich guys hate more than giving their employees a fair wage, it's a book that teaches kids that nature is our friend and businesses are bad. That's why The Lorax, which is actually a simple children's book, has been challenged by big companies who care more about seeing green in their bank accounts instead of in the environment. It starts with the Onceler, a businessman who sees a beautiful forest and thinks that the world needs more factories and fewer trees. If you were told to find good things in nature, the good things the Onceler saw were profits. But the Lorax pops up to warn him that destroying the environment might be a bad idea. The Onceler ignores him, keeps chopping and eventually wipes out the entire forest. The air turns gross, the water looks toxic, and all the animals leave, as if the Onceler sent them an eviction notice. By the end, however, the Onceler realizes his mistakes and decides to give the last tree seed to a child. On its face, the Lorax looks like your usual lesson on the importance of trees and nature, but logging companies weren't too happy about Dr. Seuss telling kids to be tree huggers instead of tree choppers.
Nope.
It's not that these companies hated trees, but it was simply because there were some areas where the timber industry was what kept food on the table. These logging companies were worried that kids would one day accuse their parents of being real-life Oncelers. In 1989, a group in California even tried to ban the Lorax from schools because they thought it was unfair to the logging industry. That means people thought the Lorax was anti-business. It gave business owners a bad rep that made them look like greedy villains who would bulldoze the entire Amazon rainforest to build parking lots. That was enough for some schools and libraries to decide that kids should stick to stories with talking animals that don't have opinions about pollution. Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Contrary to what you might think, this is not a book about a man and his pet mouse. Of Mice and Men is actually a story that took every depressing theme you could find in literature and crammed them into 100 pages. The book focuses on George and Lenny, two friends who migrated to the US during the Great Depression. But the problem is that friendship doesn't pay the bills or fill the stomach. They spend their time broke, hungry, and dreaming of a better life for each other. It's kind of like telling its readers that they are trying to achieve the American dream by working hard. But the story of these two friends shatters every notion of a good ending. George is small and sharp, whereas Lenny is a huge and strong man with the brain of a toddler. He's a good guy who doesn't know his own strength, which is a big problem in a world where he needs to tiptoe. Lenny likes petting small animals and touching nice things, but he keeps on ruining them because of his strength. This keeps him and George getting kicked out of every job they find. They find work on a ranch, where they meet Curly, the owner's angry little son, who is like the angriest chihuahua because he spends his time picking fights. Curly's wife is lonely and just wants someone to talk to. This is where Lenny comes in as her emotional punching bag. But things quickly escalate when Lenny accidentally kills a puppy and then also accidentally kills Curly's wife. The other men are out for blood, ready to rip Lenny apart like a pack of wolves with anger issues. This prompts George to make the hardest decision because he'd rather unalive his friend instead of seeing Curly and the other guys giving him a fate worse than death. So, as you can see, the ending isn't really the stuff that Disney movies talk about. George and Lenny were already miserable to begin with, but the ending simply makes you think that life is bad and you simply have to deal with it. The problem is that censorship boards didn't want kids growing up depressed and hopeless. The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Being a woman in a world dominated by men is already bad enough, as if you're playing a video game set in hard mode. But The Handmaid's Tale takes things a step further, turning the settings from hard to nightmare. The story takes place in Gilead, a place where men in power decide that women should stop reading, working, or having opinions. Instead of solving real problems, the government focuses on controlling women. If you're a woman in Gilead, your options are wife, maid, or handmaid. Handmaids are the unlucky ones. They're forced to have babies for powerful men because birth rates dropped. Essentially, they are real-life blow-up sex dolls. The main character, Offred, had a normal life before everything collapsed. She had a husband, a daughter, and the radical ability to own things. Then Gilead showed up and hit the reset button on human rights, turning her into a handmaid. Now she lives in a commander's house, where her only job is to get pregnant. So it's clear that this isn't the most woman-friendly literature out there. It paints men as abusive and power-hungry people who think women are simply decorative pieces that make them look better. Meanwhile, women are pushed further to the sidelines, looking more like they just exist for the sake of existing. And modern feminist movements don't like it when women are made to look like walking brooms instead of actual people. The sexual content in the book is also off the charts. In a lot of scenes, Offred is the subject of the commander's assault, while his wife watches them, as if she were watching porn, but in real life. The book tries to sell it as a sacred duty, but it's simply an abusive dynamic in disguise. That's why censors see it as too graphic and explicit. If you're against abusive relationships, please subscribe. The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. Imagine it's the 1900s, and you're eating your favorite burger, believing everything inside that patty is 100% pure beef, with just a bit of seasoning. But the jungle made it clear that not everything in your ground beef once mooed when it was alive. In this book, Jurgis Rudkus makes the trip from Lithuania to America to follow the American dream. But he ends up working in a meat packing plant in Chicago instead, and the American dream quickly turns into a meaty nightmare for Jurgis. The book shows you how the situation was so bad in the 1900s that no one cared about what went into the meat they were selling. Jurgis's working conditions were awful because he had to deal with machines that added a bit of rat meat into their grinders and workers losing a few of their fingers. So if you're wondering what makes that hot dog special, it's probably the human blood and sweat that went into it. And no one even cared to stop the machines in the plant because profits matter more than hygiene. Anyone who read those parts of the book suddenly started side-eyeing their burgers. Meanwhile, meatpacking companies tried to push for bans and censorships because they didn't like the way the public was forcing them to make changes to their mystery meat. The book was so controversial at that time that the US government stepped in to pass modern food safety laws. But it wasn't just the meat that got this book banned. It basically attacked capitalism, the backbone of Western society. The US won't censor you if you're demanding better food safety laws, but when you're basically calling capitalism evil, that's where they will draw the line. In the book, the system treats workers like spare parts. If you break, they toss you out. Jurgen tries to stay hopeful, but reality keeps knocking him down like a bad wrestling match. In the end, Jurgis joins the socialist movement. He realizes the problem is bigger than one factory. The whole system is built to crush people like him. And when your book tries to sell socialism instead of capitalism, you're going to quickly lose your spot in the library. The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. The Giving Tree is one of those books that looks innocent at first, but leaves you with personal issues as deep as the roots of the tree in the story. And that's why some places have questioned whether or not a book about a generous tree is age appropriate. It's all about a boy who starts off loving a tree. The tree, of course, loves the boy back. It gives him fruits and even allows him to cut its branches. Meanwhile, the boy gives nothing back. It sounds too close to home if you've ever been in a toxic relationship. But this relationship between the boy and the tree was too one-sided for the tree's own good. The tree doesn't complain until the boy eventually saws down its entire trunk, leaving nothing but a useless stump. And the boy, now an old man, uses the stump as a chair, still taking things from the tree without giving anything in return, as if he is adding insult to injury. The lesson the book tries to teach is the danger of being too generous and not setting any boundaries. That sounds like a good message, except for the fact that some people dove deeper underground to find the roots of this book's hidden themes. It's now often viewed that the tree is a mother figure, while the boy is a textbook example of a man who never learned the meaning of enough. Critics say the book teaches kids that it's okay to let people drain them completely without getting anything in return. Apparently, there's a fine line between being generous and being a simp. There are also misogynistic themes hidden in some parts of the book. This was written during the 1960s, when men were the workers, while the women were the nurturers. The tree is depicted as the woman in this one-sided relationship, basically telling readers the job of a woman is to give a man what he needs without any question. And if there's one thing society doesn't want, it's a world where women are demoted to glorified furniture that hands out apples and emotional labor for free. Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. He may not have been William Shakespeare, but Walt Whitman was better at stirring up controversy within society with his flowery words. It's safe to say he wrote the kind of poetry you wouldn't want to tell a girl when you're trying to win her over. Leaves of Grass is not your conventional book with a story from start to finish. This book is a collection of poems that paints a bold picture of America and the true nature of the human being. If America was a person, this book is the guy telling him to his face, "I know what kind of man you are." And America during the middle of the 1800s wasn't comfortable with what Leaves of Grass had to say about it. Take note that this book was published in the 1850s when America wasn't too open about topics like sexuality. But Whitman didn't hold back with his poems about the human body as if he were an artist admiring his own masterpiece. He even talked about same-sex attraction, which would basically get you a one-way ticket to burning on a stake. And when you lived during the Victorian era, when people wanted to talk about attraction in a fancy way, Whitman's poetry was the equivalent of vulgar rap music. The book also challenged religious ideas during a time when religion was everyone's best friend. If someone dissed your best friend, you wouldn't like it. That's what this book did. He wrote about finding the divine in nature and everyday life, which was blasphemy to a lot of church leaders who believed the only way to be holy was to sit quietly in church for hours while trying to look innocent and sin-free. Suggesting that the human body was just as sacred as the soul was basically literary heresy. To some, Leaves of Grass wasn't just poetry, but was a dangerous invitation to think for yourself, which church leaders thought was the equivalent of Darth Vader luring people to the dark side. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. The irony is off the charts when you have a banned book that talks about banning books. That's what Fahrenheit 451 is. It basically talks about a reality where books are banned, and censors were quick to make fantasy a reality by banning this book in many places. The book focuses on firemen, but instead of the hunky guys who put out fires, save cats stuck on trees, and flirt with the local housewives, these firemen start fires. But they're not sadistic arsonists for no reason, because their job is to burn books. And that's because they live in a society where books are considered the worst things to happen to the world. The main character, Guy Montag, is one of these firemen, but then he makes the mistake of reading a book. Suddenly, he realizes that maybe burning knowledge isn't the best idea, and his entire life falls apart faster than a burning treehouse. The book's message makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, not everyone saw it that way, because the book criticizes censorship, schools, and libraries who have banned and removed it from their shelves. The book already talks about banning books, and different censors worldwide took it more as an instruction manual than a cautionary tale. This is like canceling a fire safety manual because it talks about fires. Another reason the book gets banned is that it challenges authority, and some people hate that. It suggests that blindly following orders is not a great way to live, even if you're being told that books are evil and mindless TV shows are the best invention since sliced bread. Governments and institutions that prefer obedience over thinking are not big fans of books that make you ask why you need to work 8 hours a day to feed your family. Fahrenheit 451 is not subtle about this by waving a sign that says, "Knowledge is power, and ignorance is dangerous." The thing is that some places like people being ignorant because they're easier to control when they don't know anything.